Hey guys, have you ever had a problem understanding who fights after whom in the fight phase? Or perhaps you don't have the slightest understanding of how the charge phase really works and whom you can declare as a target of your charge? If you don't know these things and you want to learn them, or you have some other questions about the charge and fight phases, this guide is for you. And starting with the charge phase basics, even the guys who have played the game for a long time can forget some of these things, so I recommend to stick around even if you have played the game for a long time. So you can only declare units within 12 inches as targets of unit's charge. No matter how many pluses to your charge roll you have, you cannot declare anything if it's not within 12 of you. And that's very important because that's how you can basically be safe from your opponent's charges. If you can use the tape measure properly and check after all the movement advances, all the modifiers to that, how far can the unit actually move. And if you are not within 12 of that distance, you are safe from the charge, at least at that point in the game. You can charge units your unit can't see. It's a very important thing which might not be that easy to understand, especially for those who have just learned how the shooting phase works. In charge phase, you can actually charge whatever is within 12, no matter if you can see that unit or not. All units, unless otherwise stated, cannot charge after advancing and falling back. So you have to have a special rule like White Scars there with their chapter tactic that allows them to charge after advancing and charge after falling back. Otherwise, if you don't have that, you cannot do these things. So that's why it's sometimes beneficial to tag unit of your opponent, because you, even though they can like fall back and shoot, maybe if they have special rule, they might not be able to fall back and charge after that, which is very important. You can declare however many units you want in the charge phase, but you have to roll high enough on your 2d6 when rolling to charge, which we obviously roll 2 dice when we are charging something to see how far can our unit go. And we have to satisfy 3 conditions. You should reach the engagement range, which is 1 inch horizontally and 5 inches vertically, of all declared enemy units with your particular unit. Any model in the unit is enough. So you don't have to be within engagement range with all of your units or models. Just one model is good. Second, your unit must finish the move in coherency. You can never break coherency in this game. You should always end the move in coherency. You can break it whilst you are moving, but you should end the move in coherency always. And the third point is you haven't moved within engagement range of an enemy unit that you have not declared as a target of your charge. So you cannot be within 1 inch horizontally and 5 inches vertically whilst you are performing your charge. You can only do that with the targets of your charge. And you will fail your charge if you don't satisfy any of these conditions. And when you charge, you can move over 1 inch terrain freely, but you must subtract up and down climb distance for taller terrain features. And funnily enough, fly units don't ignore that, even though they can ignore other models and fly over them whilst charging. Next, Overwatch. It's a very important thing which a lot of people forget sometimes, probably because it's not as prevalent as it was in 8th edition, but still. Any unit in the game can fire Overwatch when declared as a target of a charge for 1 command point. When you fire Overwatch, you always hit on 6s and only 6s, unless you have a specific Overwatch buff and rule, like for example, the stratagem that Ironheads have, which allows them to hit on 4s in Overwatch. You still need to follow basic shooting phase rules, for example, line of sight when firing. It means that charging through an obscuring wall or around the corner protects you from Overwatch. And if you think that, well, hitting on 6s is not that scary, there is a specific type of weapons in the game of 40K which are called auto-hitting weapons, or they're usually flamers of some type. And these can be very dangerous on Overwatch because you basically get a free shooting phase, well, for 1 command point. You get a shooting phase right in the face of your opponent's unit who charges you, and you will be hidden with all of your shots because you are automatically hidden. So this does not apply to weapons that automatically hit. And another important thing is that the characters cannot hide behind the backs of their friendly units if they declare a charge. Basically, it represents a character running out of the squad that they were inside of or near of and charging into the enemy lines. So the enemy can freely shoot at the character whilst it's making a charge. It's very important because you cannot fire Overwatch if you already have someone within engagement range of you. So you basically only have one shot at it. And that's why sometimes in the game you can see sacrificial units who basically turn off Overwatch. So you charge with that unit first. It's not the unit that you really want to charge, probably not the unit that will be fighting anyway, but you want it first because you will block off the Overwatch. Because again, you cannot fire Overwatch if there is someone within engagement range of you. So you're basically already fighting. You cannot use your gun. You are protecting yourself in combat already. Rhinos are commonly used for this task because they are fast enough and durable enough to shrug off most Overwatch attacks, and especially in cases when some soft infantry but very powerful in melee wants to charge something that has a good Overwatch, like Repentia in Sister's Army faction. They are very squishy, but if you charge the Rhino first, you can turn off Overwatch of some, for example, Dinch Flamers, and it will protect your Repentia from being utterly annihilated. All in all, keep the Overwatch in mind, but usually you only need to think about the Flamers, because other things are more or less a waste of your opponent's command point. Unless you're charging something with just one wound left, for example, your character is charging with one wound left, and you are charging a knight, and that knight is also pretty much done, but it doesn't matter because you are hitting on 6s anyway, so it doesn't matter how badly the knight is degraded. That's the case where the Overwatch can really matter, so you would have to work around that. Next, heroic interventions. It's the nightmare of all the beginners in 40k. You will definitely miss 1 or 2 heroic interventions in your career in 40k, and you will be like very, very salty about that because it was so obvious after your opponent declares the heroic intervention, but it's too late to do anything. So what is a heroic intervention? Basically, any character model can make a heroic intervention, which is a 3-inch move towards the closest enemy unit at the end of the opponent's charge phase, provided there are enemy units within 3 inches horizontally and 5 inches vertically of this character, and this character isn't currently already in engagement range of any enemy unit. So your character cannot move out of combat with a heroic intervention. It's not like he abandons one combat and goes into another. So if he's already engaged, he cannot do that. But if he is not, if his hands are free, he will do everything in his or her power to save his or her comrades. There are non-character units that can do heroic interventions, and you should be aware of that. So you can never remember all the rules in 40k, so you'll have to ask your opponent, especially in cases when you really don't want to suffer the heroic intervention at this point. So you better ask, do you have any heroic interventions on your non-character units, or how far can your characters make a heroic intervention? Because sometimes character and non-character models can heroically intervene further than 3 inches, even 6 inches sometimes. And that's not as uncommon as you might think. When a character makes a heroic intervention, he or she becomes a valid target for attacks in the subsequent fight phase, even though the enemy unit did not declare this character as a target of a charge. So it's an exception from the common rule. And basically you are risking your own life to protect your dear comrades. So that's why it was not a rule in 8th, but they changed that in 9th to be more logical. So now the character can be targeted, and it's very often when your character can make a heroic intervention and then be subsequently killed in the fighting because of his or her audacity. So, fight phase basics. Units who are within engagement range of have charge this turn can be activated to fight. It means that there will be situations when your unit can start the fight phase in a position where it could have fought, but because of the fight phase sequence, who fights after whom? And units in 40k don't fight all together, so that's why the sequence exists. This unit can be left stranded out of engagement range. Likewise, it means that units that have charged but did not get a chance to swing, everything got killed too fast, can still be activated and use all the potential movement that you get from having charged to your advantage. What movement am I talking about? I'm talking about the all-famous piling and consolidation, the thing that a lot of players, again, have some problems with sometimes when they're starting out, and actually it's not that difficult once you understand it. When a unit is activated, three things happen one after the other. First you pile in, then you fight, and then you consolidate. Piling and consolidation are virtually the same thing. It's a 3-inch move unless stated otherwise. For example, my favorite Canticle of Hate on the Space Marine Chaplains, it allows you to have a 6-inch piling and 6-inch consolidation if your unit is at this point within 6 inches of the chaplain. All units get a 3-inch piling and 3-inch consolidation. It's a 3-inch move you have to perform closer to the closest model in the enemy force, model by model. So you are measuring each model to each model, and it means that one part of your squad can be obligated, if you want to, pile in and consolidate, because it's not a mandatory thing. You can select not to pile in and not to consolidate, but if you want to, you have to follow this rule. And one part of your squad can be closer to one part of the enemy force, and the other part of your squad can be closer to the other enemy unit. So you'll have to work around that if you want to use this piling consolidation move to your advantage. And it takes some skill to develop this understanding and muscle memory of how it should be done. Piling and consolidation is one of the most powerful rules in 40k, let me tell you that. It's the thing that divides a good player and a very good player. It's sometimes the difference between a lost game and a game that was won with an overwhelming advantage. So I recommend you to remember about this rule and use it. Even if sometimes you will make a mistake and use it incorrectly, so you will use it and it will actually be disadvantageous for you. Still try to learn it and try to practice it. That's how you get better with it. I'll give you just a couple of quick examples of how pilings and consolidations can help you. First of all, when you pile in, you can tag a unit which you did not initially charge. It means that this unit will be in engagement range of you. It will have a chance to fight against you, but it also means that it will next turn, for example, will need to fall back in order to not be within engagement range of you and not to be hit in combat by your unit. And it also means that it falls back, so it can probably not shoot unless it has a special rule that allows it to shoot. It can't advance, it cannot charge most of the times, so it's already very advantageous. You can pile in and consolidate onto an objective which was initially out of your reach. You can pile in and consolidate in such a way that even if you were in the open field at the start of the fight phase, you can later pile and consolidate in such a way that you are hidden and you are obscured from line of sight, so you will not be shot in the next turn of your opponent, at least with some of the guns. You can use your pile-in to get into range of an aura. For example, your captain's aura reroll wants to hit, or if it's Halbert, it's both reroll wants to hit and +1 strength with Black Templars. So it can be a lot of things, and even if you were previously outside of that range, you can get into the range with the pile-in. You can use your pile-in and consolidations to form a protective screen around the unit to prevent it from falling back, even if that unit, for example, can fall back over models like an Imperial Knight. You can form a layer that will prevent the knight from falling back over your units, especially if it's degraded and the move characteristic is very, very minimal. And I can go for hours about things that you can do with pile-ins and consolidations. We'll touch on that topic a lot in the future videos. For now, I'll just reinforce that you definitely want to use your pilings and consolidations. It's an incredible rule. After you have selected your first unit to fight, activated it. Then you can pile in and your models can start making attacks against units within engagement range or within half an inch of a model who is half an inch of the enemy model. And here I have a very helpful, hopefully, representation of how it works. So the red circles are the enemies and the green circles are your units. So your green circle in the bottom part can fight with the enemy unit because it's within 1 inch of any of the red circles. And your green circles on top can fight the back one, the right one, can fight through the one on the left, because that one on the left is within half an inch of the enemy model. And it's a very interesting thing because a lot of people don't understand that, but engagement range is 1 inch and it's 5 inches vertically. The half an inch of a model who is within half an inch is not engagement range. It's how you can fight with the enemy unit. It means that some rules that only affect units within engagement range of, only affect models within engagement range of, can, funnily enough, not affect some of the models in a unit if they are fighting through their friendly model. So pay attention to that. It's a more advanced thing and it will not come up too often, but it's something I wanted you to know. Attacks can be split just like with shooting however you want, so there is no limitation. You can literally put one attack into one enemy unit that is within engagement range of you, one into the other, one into the third one, and etc. So no limitations for that, but usually splitting your attacks is not that good unless you have multiple types of weapons in your squad and some of the weapons work better against some of the enemy units you have charged and other weapons against others. That's the case where you might want to split your attacks. After your opponent removes all the casualties, and it's very important because those casualties, those models, they impede your model's movement. So wait until all of the enemy models are removed and then you can consolidate, which is a very important part of the game, as I already mentioned. And now, O Emperor, beloved by all, we move to the fight phase sequence. It's the part where a lot of very proficient players are making a whole bunch of mistakes. Believe it or not, I was playing a game recently and one guy told me that some judge on the Nova tournament did not know how the fight phase sequence worked. He literally said the thing that contradicts the rule. So as you can understand, even proficient players sometimes make mistakes in this. So I will now help you understand it as best as I can. And it's actually not that difficult once you get the hang of it. You just really need to pay attention now in these few moments. So basically there are 3 waves of fighting to each fighting phase. When first all fight first units fight. Secondly, when all fight normally units fight. And lastly, when all fight last units fight. And only first and second categories can use the 2 command point counteroffensive stratagem to fight after an enemy unit has fought. And in practice, usually you'll be using that for your second category, for your fight normally, because your fight first units will likely have a chance to swing pretty soon as they are in the first category, so they are going first. And before I tell you who those fight first, fight normally, fight last units are, I must first tell you about a very important thing. All units in each category alternate fighting, starting with for the first category and for the last category. So fight first and fight last. They start with the player whose turn is now. And fight normally category starts with a player whose turn isn't taking place. And it's extremely important. It means that your defending unit. So for example, if you have charge in your turn and you didn't manage to kill whatever you have charged and you got stuck in combat, your fight normally unit, which it is a fight normally unit, as we'll see now in a few seconds, your fight normally unit will swing into the opponent's unit first, provided that in the wave of fight normally units, you will be selecting that unit first. Because if you decide to select other fight normally unit you have, that other unit will have to wait until your opponent fights with any of his or her fight normally units, and only then you will get a chance to swing with that unit we were talking about. So let's drop the veil on who is the fight first unit. Basically, everyone who's charged this turn is a fight first unit, or anyone who has always fight first ability is a fight first unit. For example, Emperor's Champion or Blade Champion. They all have these things that they always fight first. But, and it's a very important but, those two categories, they should not have a fight last effect applied to them, because if they have that, they are no longer considered to be fight firsts. So you should have either charged or already have a fight first ability. And another important thing, if you have charged, it means that you, for this particular phase, have this fight first ability, or you count as a fight first unit for the purposes of the fight phase sequence. Hopefully you're still with me. If you are, let's move on to fight normal units. Anyone who didn't charge, because if you did charge, you get fight first and you are in the first category, and doesn't have a fight first ability, so not a Blade Champion, for example, from the Custodes army, or someone who has a fight first ability, charge, but also has a fight last debuff on them. That's where your fight firsts who got fight lasted go. They go into fight normally. So these are the units that are fight normally. And when you are selecting them to fight, you start with a player whose turn isn't taking place now. And that's why it's always important to keep track of who you have on the board, who have already fought, who is going to be fighting first in the next turn. Because, for example, sometimes I play Deathwatch and I have this psychic power which is called Primorphic Resonance, which is basically a fight first ability and +1 to hit and melee, a very good psychic power. So I often use it to make my fight normally unit which got stuck in combat a fight first, and guarantee that this unit will get a chance to swing before the target that it's fighting with, unless the player decides to spend 2 command points for counter-offensive stratagem to fight after one of my units have already fought. And it can be done, for example, after one of my fight first fights. But, and that's a very important but, if it's my turn, again, we are starting with me because it's my turn. So I can decide to select this newly fight firsted unit, which I've made a fight first unit by casting a psychic power on it. I can decide to start with it, and then my opponent will not get a chance to use 2 command points counter-offensive stratagem, because the stratagem says that you can use it after one of my units have fought. You cannot use it right at the start of the fight phase. Who is then fight last? Well, that's the easy one. Anyone who has a fight last debuff on them and didn't charge and doesn't have a fair fight first ability is a fight last unit. That's relatively simple. So if you are just as is, didn't charge, don't have any special rules, and you have a fight last debuff on you, you are fight lasted. That's it. If you have charged or have a fight first ability, then you are fight normally. And if you have fight first and you don't have any debuffs on you, you are basically fight first. And fighting goes like this: fight first, fight normally second, and fight last, well, they go last. Another important aspect which might confuse some of you is what happens if you have several fight first effects on your unit and just one fight last effect. Do you then negate that fight last? Does one fight first only beat one fight last and vice versa? No, actually it's not like that. They've clarified it and they've said it clearly that it doesn't matter how many fight lasts you have, 1 or 1,000. It doesn't matter how many fight first effects you have on your unit, 1 or 1,000. They still count as having the fight first effect on them, or the fight last effect on them. So you still use the basic rule as if you only had one effect of each type or whatever type you have. I hope this video was useful for you. We will definitely touch on this topic more in the future videos because I want to make a special video about some advanced techniques that you can use to your advantage in the fight phase, because it's again one of the most complicated and one of the most rewarding phases in the game. So that's why we have to learn that in detail. But for this video, I think we've done enough. So I hope this video was useful for you. If you have any questions, as always, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.